This Restorative Justice Life is a production of Amplify RJ. Follow us on all social media platforms at Amplify RJ, sign up for our email list, and check out our website at amplifyrj.com to stay up to date on everything we have going on. Make sure you're subscribed to this feed on whatever platform you're listening on right now so you don't miss an episode. And finally, we'd love it if you left us a rating and review. It really helps us literally amplify this work. Thanks for listening. Enjoy the episode. Welcome to This Restorative Justice Life, the podcast that explores how the philosophy, practices, and values of restorative justice apply to our everyday lives. I'm your host, David Ryan Barcega Castro Harris, all 5 names for the ancestors, and I'm the founder of Amplify RJ. On this podcast, I talk with RJ practitioners, circle keepers, and others doing this work about how this way of being has impacted their lives.
Hey folks, I'm Elise, your producer, and today we are welcoming Michelle Day as our guest today. Michelle is a minister, attorney, and certified mediator with over 25 years of experience in conflict transformation. She has been dedicated to the healing of community and working in the criminal legal system, as well as developing restorative justice collaborations between court, community, public, and private agencies to meet the needs of court-involved children and families. Today's episode will feature a great conversation about faith, spirituality, and restorative justice. But before we get started, here are our announcements for today. Amplify RJ has been working really hard to create workshops, experiences, and community spaces to combat the anti-Asian racism that has been going on in our country. If you are interested in joining these spaces, please check out our Future Ancestor Collective and our restorative responses to Asian American racism workshops at tiny.cc/ARJ events to get more information. As always, all the information you need is in the show notes below, and don't forget to check out our YouTube channel. Without further ado, let's get into this conversation.
Welcome, Michelle. Who are you?
I am an African American woman of faith.
Who are you?
I am a woman over a certain age that we won't discuss, but that has given me the opportunity to see so many changes and so many wise people.
Who are you?
I am a woman who has lived in a lot of states and a lot of cities before I was the age of 18 because of my father's job. And so I often say I'm a person without without geographical roots. But I've found that whereas thought that was detrimental before, I see that has been helpful in what I'm doing now.
Who are you?
I am a believer in really working hard at relationships. I bumble and make a lot of mistakes, but I believe relationships are so important.
Who are you?
I am a sister. I am a daughter. I am a fur mama, a fur baby mama. I am a lover of animals and people, but I think animals first.
Who are you?
I am a lover of sunrises on a lake, and I've missed that during this period of time. So I am a lover of lake sunrises.
And finally, who are you?
I am a restless person. I am restless.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing about who you are. We're going to talk about many of those things and more in a minute, but first it's always good to check in to the fullest extent of the question, or as much as you want to answer. How are you?
I am well. I am absolutely well. I am grateful, really, this has been a really rough period of time. A lot of people have lost many people dear to them. I've lost a very, very good friend that I spoke earlier of having no roots geographically, but that friend was a friend for me from college to, now, and actually before college. But that was last year. And this year, I'm feeling really grateful for how much I didn't lose, for how much my family didn't lose, for how much my friends and loved ones didn't lose. So I'm just grateful. That's how I am.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about being vertical and ventilated, right? That we can
Yes.
appreciate, and hold in tension the grief that so many people are feeling. To timestamp this conversation, because this is going to come out in a couple weeks,
Hmm.
it is March 31st. We are still in the process of rolling out a vaccine, right? We're in the
Hmm.
middle of the trial of Derek Chauvin. We're in the middle of facing a ton of anti-Asian violence, right? And there are still beautiful things about life. And holding that tension is really difficult sometimes, I find for myself. But, the gratitude is super helpful. I'm curious if there's a practice for you that has kept you going during this time.
Um, yes. And that practice for me is to, as you know, I'm an early morning riser. And so I love to be up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Um, Keeping that time and keeping that time sacred for me is important. And so even though I've been kind of spotty about that, because unfortunately I do allow people to schedule things at 8:30 and 9 o'clock at night, which is way past my bedtime, right? And so then that makes me tired in the morning. But when I stick to my morning routine of getting up and being thankful and being quiet, it gets me through everything.
Yeah, what does that involve, that sacred time for you?
Well, usually the first thing I do is get a cup of coffee, which is really, you know, kind of counterintuitive when I tell you the next things that I do, right? The first thing I do is get my drug, and then I get my devotion book, and I spend some time with God. And again, like I said, that's really kind of backwards. It should be the time with God before I spend the time with the drug, but I'm going to be
You got to
honest
do what
here.
works for you.
Yeah, not really. I always say he's merciful. And I love to light a candle. I love to light a candle and just, spend time reading things that inspire me, being quiet, planning for the day.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about morning rituals that I haven't quite nailed down. Right? It's seven. We started this conversation at 7 o'clock where I am, and to me that looks like it's 6:45. Roll out of bed, go make some tea, eat a piece of bread, and here we are. That's definitely not my normal day, but again, so grateful that you were able to make this time today, um,
So,
because
what
you
is your
have.
normal day?
Oh, there is no normal day. Well, okay.
Um,
So I'll wake up normally somewhere between 7 and 8. I will, I will make breakfast. I'll take a walk, and then pretty quickly get started with the work since I'm working with people bi-coastally. Um, and
mhm.
there are, I think one of the practices that's been super helpful for me is just like taking walks just around my block. I was telling my wife
Mhm.
yesterday that like my neighbor's dogs are the two beings that I see the most often, right? Because if I'm taking a walk around the block every hour or two, like I'm gonna see them and they're always just like, running along the fence, like there to greet me, and they're like the most chill dogs. But I was just noticing that like of course, I spend more time with my wife, but especially because of COVID times, like those two beings are the beings that I see the most, and so that's been super helpful just to break up the back to back to back Zoom meetings or just being zoned in. Because
Mhm.
when you have no commute anywhere, right, you could always be at work, right? my bed
Yes.
and my office are 20 feet from each other. So we do. I do my best, but there are definitely other practices that I could be doing to have longevity in this work. You've been doing this work for a long time, and probably before you even knew the words restorative justice. So, in your own words, share how that journey got started for you.
I haven't been doing this work as long as as the specific restorative justice, as long as it seems. And it has been a serious journey for me. The journey really started with um, shortly after I came out of law school. I began practicing in the area of labor and employment. And so I've always been in the relationship mode type of thing, where we either, negotiating contracts, doing the contract negotiations, where, relationships are everything, or the employment discrimination, where you really try to help people to understand that if they treat each other right, they won't get sued, you know. But that never really um, came together well in the way in which I was practicing that, because, of course, I was practicing law. And the ultimate uh, result when relationships get broken when you're practicing law is litigation, which just really scorches the earth and breaks relationships even further. Somebody wins, somebody loses, but those who lose are always uneasy, and those who win should be uneasy because nobody wants to be on the losing side forever. So it just makes for really uneasy relationships. And I remember after I had been practicing for a long time, I was practicing with McDonald's Corporation at that time, having left the governmental sector. And McDonald's, if you know anything about McDonald's, at that time they prided themselves on being one big happy family of owner operators, suppliers, and corporate um, restaurants and employees, all of whom came up through the ranks. They started when they were um, at the counter in some of the restaurants, they call them stores, and moved their way up through the ranks right up to the president of the company. Um, those of us, like the attorneys, were seen as sort of like the outsiders who were brought in to help the family function, but we're
Sure.
still one big happy family. Now, with that thought in mind, of course, when something happened and that wasn't fair or that wasn't just, it always wound up in litigation. And the one big happy family was always at each other's throats. And so I always wind up asking God questions. And and my question to God at that time was like, certainly there is a better way for people to be in relationship with each other than litigation, because we're just breaking the relationships further. At that time, mediation was just kind of bringing its head out with respect to um, conflict transformation or conflict resolution in the corporate sector. So I thought that the answer that I was being given was mediation. And so I started bringing mediation more and more into the work that we were doing in the department. However, with mediation, of course, you can only really fix the issue that has been brought up. You're not fixing the relationship. So, of course, if you're an independent mediator, that makes you rich, because people have to keep coming back to you. They have to keep coming back. And when they come back, they, of course, bring that one other issue, but they still don't get to the heart of the matter that in the relationship. So just that was my first question of God, the universe, whatever people want to call it. But McDonald's gives a sabbatical after 10 years. And so with 10 years and 30 seconds under my belt, I took my sabbatical. And I went to Ghana with my church. And at that time, the minister of our church was Reverend Dr. Jeremiah Wright. If you're familiar with him, he was the like lightning rod for the Obama election. But
Goddamn
he's
America.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes, you know. But very wise man, taught me just about everything I know about social justice. When you go on a sojourn with Dr. Wright, you don't just visit a place. We were talking about getting up early in the morning, right? He gets the entire tour team. At that time, we had 60 people that went with us. So we were in like two different buses or three buses. Everybody has to be up by 6:30 in the morning. And at 6:30 in the morning, you grab your breakfast and then you sit down for a lesson. And his lessons were always threefold: the history of the place that we were going to visit, how that history fit in with not just the Ghanaian or African perspective of the history, but how it also fits in with the American part of history. And then the biblical part. And then we would get to go on the tour for the day. Well, I'm going to answer your question eventually. Okay, but one of the tours was the what's called the slave castles in their mind. And if you've ever been to Ghana or to any of the other coastal cities where the slave trade took place, there was a dungeon, and over that dungeon was built the church. And so that meant that the captors were worshiping over the dungeons where they were keeping people that they were getting ready to sell. So that brought up a question for me in terms of our faith and how we truly practice our faith. But one of those evenings when I was sitting on the beach at midnight in the Cape Coast, watching the waters go out, I remember thinking, okay, my ancestors went out on these waters and they didn't come back. And so I need to know how I can put a better use to the life that I'm living than I love McDonald's, met wonderful people there, but I'm still making a corporation rich, right? So I need a little bit better use of my life. And I asked that question. And the answer that I believe that I received was go to seminary. And so when I came back from that sabbatical, I ran into the president of the company and said, I quit. I'm going to seminary. So I went to seminary. To make a long story short, with respect to seminary, I always tell people this, and that is that God told me to go to seminary, but he probably didn't tell me to quit my job to do it. So I kind of ran out ahead. But one of the many jobs that I had to work in order to continue to pay for my mortgage while I was in seminary was at a community organizing organization. And in that work, one of the things that we started doing, it was Trinity and a number of other churches, was to look at the school to prison pipeline. We were looking at ways to just stop all that was going on, especially with our Black and brown children. And when we looked at the school to prison pipeline, we realized that that pipeline was being fed by disproportionate suspensions and expulsions. So we decided to do this great campaign and get the Chicago Public Schools to reduce the suspensions and expulsions and substantially. So we look at the school code and we see in the school code that there's this little thing, this little bitty blurb saying that the administration could use restorative justice as an alternative to suspensions and expulsions. So we start advocating for that. And we're advocating for, if you're familiar with the Solinsky form of organizing, okay, we're advocating it for it using Solinsky organizing, making our target and going for it, right?
Agitating.
Agitating, exactly. Well, it was in one of those campaigns that I met Ora Shoup and Cheryl Graves. And one of the things that they had to say, because the campaign didn't really go well, it was not at all what we would now call restorative at all. And and I had you know how you can see a disaster happening before it happens, and it's like this train wreck, but you can't stop it. And I remember thinking, oh my God, this is not going to end well. How do we stop this? Um, Ora came up to me and said, we're really glad that you guys are holding up the banner of restorative justice. But do you really know what it is? you know, because
That could be
so
the question of my life.
exactly. And so I am forever thankful that God gave me a humble enough spirit to say, no, no, not at all. And so that began my journey of learning about restorative justice. And one of the things that I realized, I really became at odds with that particular organization because the organization did not want us to engage restoratively or really to learn about restorative justice, just force CPS, to instill restorative justice. So we had to part ways. But in that parting of the ways, the what I realized was that the church, particularly the Black church, has always been very, very much at the forefront of implementing its own um, freedoms, implementing its own work to work for, justice. And so I was thinking, we're asking CPS to do what we should be doing. Now, yes, CPS should do it, but where's the RJ in our communities? Where's the understanding of RJ in our communities? And so, thanks to, I stand on the shoulders of Aura and Robert and Cheryl, because they were kind enough to let me learn at their feet, and what I realized was that that was the answer to the question that I had asked, 7 or 8 years prior, was how are people in better relationship with each other? And it in understanding that this goes back to our ancestral way of being in relationship, the indigenous way of being in relationship. And it it just it just finally um, pulled everything together in my spirit, in my heart, in my mind, because one of the things that I realized when I first asked that question was that we cannot legislate right relationships. I'm trying to make people adhere to discrimination laws. Well, we passed the Civil Rights Act, what, 1964? I was a baby. But look at where we are now. And we're here because clearly the law cannot make people change their hearts and minds. You have to be in relationship with each other. And so that was the great epiphany for me. And that's been the mission, the work, the vision ever since then, is that marrying my faith to the faith in action of restorative justice is the answer to the question.
Yeah.
So now that I've taken up the entire hour on one question.
Well, that was only 13 minutes. You were like, what do I have to share? There was so much in there. I actually want to go all the way back to the beginning of what you were talking about. I have been dismissed from jury service, so I can talk about this now.
How did you get dismissed?
How?
Did you see the whole trial through, or did you get yourself dismissed?
I got myself dismissed.
Oh no! Okay.
So last week, which was the fourth week of March, I was called for jury service. The first civil case that has gone to a jury in LA County in over a year. And it was, without going into details, because I don't know all of them, I never actually made it to trial. I got myself kicked out through my answers to the lawyers in selection. It was a mesothelioma case. Someone who had contracted mesothelioma was suing a company for use of one of their products, right? And in the survey questionnaire that they have you fill out, I was like, I live and breathe restorative justice. I don't think this should ever have gotten here. The things can be worked out in a relationship. I can't say for sure until I hear the evidence that, one side or the other is more responsible, but there's probably some responsibility on behalf of this company. I know people sue for frivolous reasons. And this person has cancer, right? And is probably struggling to figure out how to pay their bills and, hopefully not die. So company, when they came to you with this request, what is the thing that you could have worked out within the context of relationship? We didn't need to get here. You didn't need to bring 50 strangers who know nothing about mesothelioma, who know nothing about the people involved to try to make a quote-unquote objective decision. So that's how I got myself kicked out of jury service. Yeah.
That would definitely do it.
So that's how I got myself kicked out. But, this work is so much about relationships. And I have, over the past few years, right, I have come to learn this work in the very similar ways that you have. I didn't come from a legal background, but, I learned from the same people. Cheryl was the very first episode of this podcast. Robert was episode 9. If people want to go back and learn from them, Aura has since passed almost 3 years ago now. But, doing this work in the context of relationships, in community, relying on our ancestral values of interconnection, right? That's it. I'm curious. Oh man, and I didn't even touch on the piece with Ghana, right? There's so much in what you shared there about that resonates with me as well, right? Where doing this work now for my ancestors, right? You can see the T-shirt that says the Future Ancestors Collective, where there are lots of different folks who are really taking ideas of Sankofa or the Haudenosaunee law of 7 generations seriously, right? Mm-hmm. How are we relying on the wisdom of the people who've come before us to build better futures for the people who are to come, not just for ourselves immediately, not just making McDonald's rich and ourselves, right? So there's so much resonance there. And I think the last thing that I really clicked on was, when we come to doing social justice work, right, there is so much antagonism, agitation, pitting the other side as evil, the bad people. Yes. And yes, they're causing harm, but they're also a part of, in McDonald's language, our big happy family, right? So how are we going to move forward together in a good way? And I think that's a really hard question to ask when people are refusing to even come to the table in good faith, right? We can't agree on this is what happened and this is the impact. But yeah, that was so much, and hitting it back over to you.
Well, actually, you hit on, as I said before, I always wind up asking God questions. And I'm sure when I get to the pearly gates, it's going to be like, don't bring a question up in here, all right? But that's the question I'm on now. how do we have that conversation with people who are not, who don't look like us ideologically, you know? And so, one of the books that really kind of got me on that track, I actually read maybe 20 years ago, and it's called "Your Blues Ain't Like Mine"
Mm.
by B.B. Moore Campbell, and she did a fictionalized account of the Emmett Till murder,
Mm.
and she drew those characters so well that by the time she was finished dealing with the each of the characters, you understood what made the woman tick who made the white woman who made the false claim. You understood what made the husband tick, who felt like he had to um, assert his white manhood. You understood what made the cousin tick, who turned Emmett in. And you understood all of that. And when you do that, I was actually very angry with B.B. Moore Campbell because
Mm.
I didn't want to have empathy for people that to me were hateful.
Yeah.
But now when I look back on that, I realize that that's part of the answer to my question. And that is that we have to, at some point in time, through the work that we do, um, not stop preaching to the choir, but continue preaching to the choir, the people who are willing to hear the message of restoration and reconciliation, but also find ways to be in proximity with the people who are not the choir, the Proud Boys, the people that I don't even want to associate with. I really don't, but how's the message going to be shared if we can't get in proximity with each other, if we can't get in relationship with each other? So that's my next question to the universe, you know?
Right.
And yeah.
I was gonna say, like, one of the things that I, I'm not perfect in this work, right? Always growing, always unlearning, learning. I'm very quick with the block, mute, or whatever button on social media, right? Mostly because, like, I don't have energy to deal with that. I've got all this other work that I'm trying to do. Like, it doesn't happen often, but when it does on Amplify RJ social media channels, like, I'm ruthless and not restorative at all. With like, nope, you don't get to say that kind of stuff in this space, right? Um, and I don't feel bad about that. Um, I'm reflecting on the conversation that I had with Kay Pranis at the beginning of this year on this podcast. What was it? For people's reference, episode 15, right? We were having that conversation on January 6th. And
Wow.
as soon as that conversation ended, as soon as our recording ended, her grandson came into the room and said, like, they're storming the Capitol. And like within the
Oh my
context of
God.
that conversation, um, I was saying like I do not have the capacity to have a conversation. It could be, of course, it didn't start on January 6th, right? But I don't have the capacity to have those conversations. And Kay's thing was like, you're right, that's my job, right? As a white person, that's what I've been heavily
Mm-hmm.
relying on. People really doing this within the context of people who I can reach, right? I know the Amplify RJ platform where I explicitly say like this is like abolition, anti-racism, decolonization. That's not for everybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the people that we equip, right? So many of the people who come through our space are teachers, and because they are teachers, that means 80% of them are white women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the people that we're equipping to be able to have those conversations to challenge power. And like I still think like there are ways that I could do that better for myself, but that's always that as of late that has been my take on all this, because there is so much work to be done. I don't have to do all of it.
This is true. This is true. And perhaps that's something that I need to keep in mind. Work through the ones that I can work through
Right. I mean, it's
And
like even within the context of your church community, right?
mhm.
Um,
Oh, you would not believe the context of my church.
right. So the black
One
church.
one of those mute buttons had to be used with one of my Christian fellows, one of my Christian minister fellows. It's like,
Right. I was
no,
gonna say,
really.
as much as like the black church has been a liberatory space in a lot of ways, it's also been an oppressive space for many people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because this has never been a current events podcast, but because it's on the top of my head, right? Lil Nas X released that video, and you know I am. I appreciated Old Town Road. I have no feelings one way or the other about Lil Nas X, but the conversation around like, what about the children? What kind of messages are you sending to children about this? The response is like, well, this is what happens when you have such dogmatic beliefs about who belongs and who doesn't, and you create trauma, and this is the result. And I'm not saying that his art is good or bad. His art is what it is, but it's the result of you not being accepting. So like, how do you, like,
Mm-hmm.
maybe that's a space for you to be having those conversations, right? Maybe not going to a clan bar and trying to strike up a conversation.
Oh, that would be hilarious, wouldn't it? Yes, those conversations are going on in the church, and not just the Black church, but the church period.
Yeah.
Those conversations are going on. The United Church of Christ, nationally and internationally, is an open and affirming um, denomination.
Mm-hmm.
Now, however, it's also an autonomous denomination. So that means that each local congregation gets to pick what they want to do with respect to open and affirming. But even in those congregations that are open and affirming, you still have people who are judgmental.
Yeah.
And so
You
so
can't
there's a lot of
legislate
work.
people's behavior or hearts and
You
minds, like you said
can't.
before.
You can't. So there's a lot of work to be done in the denomination in each and every congregation. There's a lot of work to be done. I could go to my grave at the age of 150, and I probably wouldn't be able to have made a large dent in the relationships in just the cluster six, which is, like 13 churches, you know. And so I just, to your point, when we think of it in that way, it's almost overwhelming. But one of the things that I always tell folks in Nehemiah, and I have to continue to remind myself, is that we're there to sow seeds, and God brings the harvest. So we sow as many seeds as we can, and we might not always see, what that comes out to be. Just like, B.B. Moore Campbell's book that I read 20 years ago, it finally poof dawned on me. So that was the seed that she sowed. So that's what we're doing, is sowing seeds.
Yeah.
And I always have to keep that in mind. Otherwise, I get so overwhelmed. I get
So you,
so
so you mentioned Nehemiah. I know what that is, but can you explain to our listeners
overwhelmed.
what that is
Um,
and how it started?
well, it started as a result of that break with the organization that I was telling you about, where it said, we can do this, and we can do this and do it well. And so I kind of gathered, there was 14 of us actually, who from 3 or 4 different churches and one social service agency. And Spicer trained us first. And so we learned how to do circles. And we became, at that time, what was called the Nehemiah Project. And we were doing circles in schools. We were doing circles and education pieces with different churches. And the work became so deep in the trenches that we realized that we needed to incorporate when we got ready to incorporate, it turned out there were like 19 Nehemiah projects out there. So we had to incorporate under Nehemiah Trinity Rising, um, not associated with Trinity United Church of Christ, but that was what we incorporated in. We grew out of Trinity being one of the churches. Uh, our whole goal, our whole vision is to create an avalanche of people who understand restorative justice as being um, um, the philosophy and the practice that builds right relationships interpersonally, systemically, and structurally. Okay, so we always say that we can change systems with this, we can change structures with this, we can start, interpersonally. That's Nehemiah.
Yeah.
Um, we
I encountered Nehemiah in 2015, I believe, um, when you were trying to set up a community project in Woodlawn. Um, I know that is a part of what you do. What are the other things that y'all have been doing since? Oh,
we we approach our work in a fivefold manner. It starts with education, um, transfer skills, transfer or training, whatever you want to call it. Implementation strategies for those who have gone through the education process or the training. How do they implement it in their setting or in their community? And then also advocacy and collaboration. Um, One of the major projects that we have been involved in is the In Money Bail Coalition and its child, the pretrial justice network, Illinois Pretrial Justice Network, which grew out of the In Money Bail Coalition. But I have to share with you how that came about because it will explain really how our work goes. We were providing RJ philosophy and practices and training in York High School, which is in Cook County Jail. And it was not, prior to that time, I didn't realize that there were people who had been in jail for 2, 3, 4, and 5 years without ever having had a trial, simply because they couldn't afford to pay bail. Well, at that time, we were familiar with Charlene Grace and Matt McLaughlin, and Nehemiah and Chicago Community Bond Fund, Appleseed, and a couple of other organizations formed the Coalition Against Money Bail. And it was through that coalition that we worked to bring about the legislation that just passed a couple of weeks ago, almost 2 months ago now. But that's how things kind of move for us. We go where people want to hear this message. We provide education on it. And then if they want to get skills, we provide training and then help them to implement. Places where we have done that include DePaul University's Mission and Spiritual Care, Washington Park through Church of the Good Shepherd in their area. We're currently doing intergenerational circles with the congregation there and the youth from alternatives and spreading it out to include other churches in the area. We were involved in both forming and helping to implement and sustain what was called the Alternatives to Incarceration program in Roseland. And so that's the type of work we do. It always starts out with education, and then we hope that those seeds flow into something else.
yeah. You've been doing that for the last couple years. At the same time, so there's the community work, but you're also working within the criminal legal system in juvenile court. Um, how does restorative justice play a role in the way that you move there?
You know what? I have to, I'm going to tell you a long story. Okay. And it
That's what a
involves,
podcast is for.
okay. So remember, I said that God didn't really tell me to quit my job. He just said, go to seminary, right? So I did go to seminary. I did fall into restorative justice, did start Nehemiah, and was so deep in the trenches that I really don't know how I'm able to still have this house. Okay. Because I was so broke. I was so broke. I could see the bottom of my pockets. Anyway, but in circle one day with Aura and Cheryl, and I just said, I just put it out there to the group, like, hey, if I don't find ways to make income while I'm also, doing this work, I am going to lose my house. And maybe about 3 weeks later, um, they uh, they they came to me and said that a position was open with Judge Sophia Hall, and that they wanted to recommend me for the position. Well, back up again, through RJ and Orange Cheryl and Emmanuel, Andre, there was a conference that was held at Roosevelt. And Emmanuel and I were the circle keepers for a circle where Judge Hall was in the circle.
Roosevelt
And
University in Chicago for people
Roosevelt
yeah.
University in Chicago, right? And Judge Hall, if you know anything about her, she's this brilliant woman and very, very outspoken and um, wise, but very outspoken. And so Judge Hall would speak without the talking piece. And Emmanuel and I kept looking at each other like, which one of us is going to tell the judge that she can't talk without the talking piece? So finally, I said, excuse me, Judge Hall, you can't talk without the talking piece. And she was very wonderful about it. She was so sweet. She's like, oh, okay, well, no problem. And she was great for the rest of the circle. Well, when Cheryl and Aura went to her with the fact that they had a suggestion for replacement for her right hand, which was Peter Newman, she said, Michelle Day, that name sounds familiar. She's the one that told me to shut up in the circle. And I got the job. So I actually am blessed to be able to walk, talk, sleep, breathe, and eat restorative justice. So Nehemiah, where we don't make a whole lot of money, we just do a lot of work. Okay. And then, of course, the circuit court. Judge Hall is the presiding judge of the resource section of, of juvenile justice and child protection. The resource section has its whole purpose in bringing together restorative justice practitioners across the city and across the county. So we don't really engage in the legal system in and of itself, but we do that connection work through the citywide restorative justice meetings, through basically all day long I spend on the phone going, hey, do you know so-and-so? Well, so-and-so might be able to help you with the thing that you're working on now, So that connection work. And it's just a joy. It is just a joy. So I was so blessed to be able to have this job and do this work 24/7.
Yeah, a question that I've asked you before, and I'm curious what your answer is now, or if it's the same, is how do you reconcile doing this work within the system that is causing so much harm to our people, to our young people?
Yeah.
Part of it's a paycheck.
Again, part of it's a paycheck, but then the other part of it is that the work that I do, as I said, I'm not involved with the court. No. So I'm not even involved with, well, that's another story. We'll talk about that in a second, the Restorative Justice Court. But I'm involved with efforts to make sure that restorative justice spreads, that the philosophy and the practice spreads. So I spend a lot of time in community talking to people who have never heard about RJ. And of course, I talk about it from the standpoint of the um, importance of the indigenous relationship building aspects of RJ, not just the alternatives to punishment. That it's, it can be an alternative, but it's so much more than that. And we have to remember that. So I feel like I am doing exactly what I've been called to do in terms of spreading the word of our faith in action, which is RJ. Now, with respect to the court system, as I said earlier, I believe that RJ is important in building both interpersonal, systemic, and structural relationships that are right and healthy. And you do that one person at a time. When people look at a system and you say that a system is evil, well, systems built by people. A system is sustained by people. So you got to change hearts and minds one at a time. Now, I am truly, in my mind, I'm an abolitionist. I would love to see us with no courts, no police, no whatever. But you've got to have you have to have the systems in place in community, which again become systems, that that not take the place of those things, but serve to keep the community healthy and keep the community um, striving towards the better good. So I don't know any other way to do this work except to be about the both and for now, as opposed to the either or.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious. What's coming next for Nehemiah?
Mm-hmm. Uh, Next for Nehemiah is for us to get funded, for us to get staffed. We've been doing this primarily by virtue of volunteers. And in some instances, we've gotten, small grants and things like that, which has been really helpful, you know. But now, if you want to create an avalanche, you have to build your footprint, and we haven't been doing that. So I'm pulling back and building the footprint, and going from there because so many blessings have come, nationally, internationally, um, ways in which we can make a difference. But we can't do it if we're not structurally sound. We can't do it if we aren't paying attention to building the house. And as you know, if you build a house on straw, it's going to fall. So I want a firm foundation. That's what's next for Nehemiah. And it will be consistently doing the same things. I think our integrity is in place. I think that we have people with great integrity. We've come out of more places than we've gone into. Because if you're not willing to do a holistic approach to our day, we don't, we won't stay. We'll help you to educate your folks, but not going to help you do a band-aid approach to anything. So I think that our integrity has stayed in place, and that's important to me. But
Mm.
I need for us to grow.
I usually ask this later, and we'll probably loop back to this. How can people support your work in the ways that you want to be supported?
People have been so kind, in terms of spreading the word about what we do, about including us in things. So I would say this just continue to be kind. That is what we need. Um, need suggestions for just be kind. That's it. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that.
We're getting to the part where I ask the questions that I ask everybody. Um, define restorative justice.
That is so hard. But if I were to do it in 4 or 5 words or less, I would say my faith in action. You know, um, if I were to do the long drawn out Nehemiah way of doing it, it is, as a set of ancient philosophy and practices that build relationships interpersonally, systemically, and structurally that are in keeping with the way that we were meant to be by the Creator.
You know, the work of Nehemiah is to spread this work everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm. We want to take over the world.
so
we want people to take over the world.
Right. In response to this question, people often say schools, families, and the criminal legal system. So you can't say those three. What is one place or situation you wish people really knew this work?
Communities.
In what way?
If we were doing this and we were doing it block by block by block by block by block by block by block, oh, what a difference it would make. My original answer to your question would have been congregations. Mm-hmm. And that congregations, by the word congregations, I include all settings of faith, whether it's, like the synagogue, the mosque, the church, the temple. I include all. I would have started with that. But if you read the news this morning, less and less people are engaged in formal religion, mm-hmm. Formal worship. So we would be starting at a place that is losing membership anyway. So I would say the community, block by block by block by block by block,
Yeah, for sure. And I do think within the context of congregations, still definitely needed. But again, everywhere. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You get to sit in circle with 4 people, who living or dead. Who are they, and what is the question that you ask the circle?
Well, the first one would be my great uncle Sandy's brother. Actually, it would be my great great uncle Sandy's brother. He was lynched. He had a farm in North Carolina at a time when Black men did not have farms, and the white power structure wanted his farm, and he refused to give it. He got lynched. For some reason, the family was still able to keep the farm. But what bothers me is that we don't know his name. We always refer to him as Great Uncle Sandy's brother, right? So I want him in the circle with me. I want Cheryl Blackwell Bryson in the circle with me. She's passed on. She's a very good friend. But she was my mentor and the first Black female department head of a major law firm here in Chicago for labor and employment. I want her in the circle with me because she knew so much about Black history and just history, period. She was from the East Coast, but she just knew. Let's see. I want, there's a guy named Shanta, and I will never be able to say his name right, but he's Sri Lankan. And he heads a group called Omnia, and they form international peacemaking teams that go to places where there is war and conflict, like Sri Lanka, like Nigeria, like places like that, and they do peacemaking from the ground up and over and around, and they do such beautiful work. So I would like him to circle. And I get one more person, right? Oh. I think I want a historical figure, but I don't know who. So can I just say a historical figure, or I have to say a name? I have to pick somebody. Phyllis Wheatley. Phyllis Wheatley. I would like to have her in the circle. Huh? She was around the time of the Revolutionary War. She was actually of African royalty, okay? But then she was brought over here as a slave. And she was one of the ones that managed to get into proximity with George Washington and convince him that he should allow the uh, freedmen and slaves, escaped slaves, to serve in the and that they were human enough to serve as soldiers, that they were valiant enough, that they were intelligent enough to die for the country that was enslaving them. And she wrote books at the time. She could read, she could write, she was wonderful, she could write books. Of course, she died in poverty because she was Black and she was female. But she's just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So Phyllis Wheatley.
And what's the question that you're going to ask the circle?
A very open-ended question. What advice do you have for us? What advice do you have for us?
What is a piece of advice or an affirmation that you want everyone listening to this podcast to hear?
I think that I'm saying it right, but this is not profound at all, but it has every meaning to me because I have a tendency to um, to do just the opposite. And it was advice from the daughter of the woman who plays on that show, How to Get Away with Murder. Okay, right. I said it's not profound, but her daughter told she was stressing over something that had been done to her by the network or whatever, and her young daughter, said, "Mom, don't let other people put their lives into your life." And I was like, "Whoa, that's what I do all the time. I let other people put their life into my life." I like that. So that's what I would leave.
Yeah. It makes me feel good about blocking that person on Instagram this morning. um, who is one person that I should have on this podcast, and you have to help me get them on?
You know Kyria Rogers, right?
I don't.
She's downstate. She's at Millikan University. She's just started an organization. They're actually going to have a conference in June. I need to send you the flyer for it, but it's Global Restorative Justice, and
Okay.
they've already got a good. They've got a great. What do you want to call it? Yeah, so it would be great to have some downstate, because I'm trying to make sure that she's involved in the NACRJ conference, so it's not just Chicago. It needs to be
Yeah.
Illinois as well. You know.
So I'll send you
Um,
an email to remind you to send us an introductory email.
yeah, absolutely. Okay, and
Beautiful.
then yeah, so I'll be thinking, because I'm meeting a lot of wonderful people who are doing some great work. Um, but they are, oh, well, I'm sorry, but this is Chicago. Okay, do you know Gia
Go for it.
Johnson?
I don't.
Gia
Maybe.
Johnson has a she has a program in the prisons where people are actually taking seminary classes for credit so that they can get a seminary degree. So she is teaching, she's going into the things, and precious blood might be involved some ways in that. They have partners. Most of the partners are on like Safer Foundation, like Marlon Chamberlain, people like that. Um, but they're going into the seminaries and doing some, no, not seminaries, they're going into the prisons and giving a seminary education. You know, it's like, so when the people come out, they will, you know, have their masters in divinity. They will have their you know, masters in theology, whatever. Anyway, that's one. But that's again Chicago. So I'll give some.
No worries. No, that's fine. Don't worry.
Oh, you know who
Um,
you should talk to? And I think where you're located, Modus Theater.
Lotus Theater?
Modus. M-O,
Modus.
M as in Michael, O, D as in dog, U-S. Modus Theater.
Mm.
They do restorative justice theatrical work, but it's such a different form of expression. At the conference in Denver, what they do is they have people come up and tell their story. And so this one woman came up and she told her story. They just picked somebody from the audience, you know, and she said, you know, her son had been killed, and she saw her son killed. You know, she saw the tape of her son killed on the security tape, and that has always stayed with her. They did the improvisation work and acted it out. There wasn't a dry eye in the room, and you know how big the rooms are. And so that was in Denver, and it brought a lot of healing to her, to have people hear her story, feel her story, not just hear, but feel it. But it's Modus Theater. Modus, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You
You got a
should
handful of
interview them.
places.
Yeah.
Um, all right. Well, we'll definitely make sure that we put the link to Nehemiah Trinity Rising in the show notes so people can learn more about your work. Are there any other words that you want to leave the people with?
I have no more words. I have no more words. I would just say, sow as many seeds as we can. Sow as many good seeds as we can.
Yeah, so you heard it from Michelle. Share this podcast with all of your friends. Check out Amplify RJ's work online. Check out Nehemiah Trinity Rising. Do this work for yourself, right? This isn't just about intellectually knowing it. It's about practicing in our everyday lives. Thank you so much, Michelle, for giving your time, your story, your wisdom. See, you had lots of things to share. Everyone else,
You are an
we will talk
amazing
to
interviewer. That's what it is. You're amazing interviewing. And bless this work. This is just amazing.
Well, thank you, Michelle. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll be back with another episode next week. Take care.
Elise here. Here are a few things that I've taken away from this episode today. I really appreciated when Michelle brought up the idea of relationships. She mentioned that you cannot legislate internal change, which I think is so important. I think that often as a society we believe that policy can change everything, but it is so important to have that cultural change, which is fostered by relationship building. How do you prioritize building relationships in your life? Also, I really appreciated when she brought up the idea of giving empathy to those who do not show empathy towards others. It can be really difficult to find the balance between expressing empathy and following your own needs, and I think it is so important to recognize your own needs in a situation. But I really appreciated that she brought up this point about showing empathy always to everyone. In what ways do you show empathy? Thank you so much for listening, and before you go, don't forget to check out our YouTube channel and our Future Ancestors Collective. All the information you need is down below in the show notes, and thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next week.
Like what you heard? Please subscribe, rate, review, and share this podcast on whatever platform you're using right now. It really helps us further amplify this work. You can also support us by following us on our social platforms, signing up for our email list, rocking our new merch, joining our Patreon, or signing up for a workshop. So many options! Links to everything in the show notes and on our website, amplifyrj.com. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.